Hey everyone, and welcome to this Risky Business product demo. These are the demos we do at Risky Biz HQ, where we get one of our sponsors on to show off some of their tech. And joining me today is Ryan Kalember. He is the Executive Vice President for Cybersecurity Strategy at Proofpoint, and he is here to talk to us about Proofpoint Sigma, which is their insider threat and DLP platform. It's kind of combining those two concepts. And, you know, when you think of DLP, don't think of the bad old days 10, 15 years ago when it was, DLP stuff was really horrible. It's done a little bit differently these days, and Ryan's here to show us at least Proofpoint's approach. Ryan, welcome.
Great to be here, Pat.
Excellent. So why don't you tell us what you're actually going to be showing off today? It's show and tell with Risky Biz.
It is. I love show and tell. It's always my favorite day at school. But
I think we need to rename this channel to cyber vendor show and tell. But anyway, go on. I'll write that down. But let's continue.
Absolutely, good note for later. But what I'm going to be going through today is what we call our Sigma platform. It's basically the collection of tools that you can use to stop data going from places it shouldn't be going, or to places rather it shouldn't be going, as well as look at kind of more insider risk scenarios, both from an investigative perspective as well as a more proactive perspective. So it's a different way than you might be used to thinking of data loss prevention or classic DLP, because it really does sort of put the person at the center of the analysis, in addition to, of course, doing all of the types of data classification that you'd expect from a solution like this one.
Okay. So now, just to be clear, are you showing us some sort of data loss prevention thing that is based on your cloud email security data, or is this like an endpoint thing or a browser plugin, or it would just be helpful if you could tell us exactly what it is.
Yeah, architecturally, it is all of the above, right? So we took our medicine all the way back in 2019 and built a single cloud backend to interface with data that is collected either through the endpoint, which is frankly where most of the interesting telemetry comes from these days. But obviously events that happen through email, either through sort of Graph API or actually email gateway type events, as well as the cloud side. It tends to be Microsoft 365, Google Workspace APIs feeding that, although of course there are other ways to do it. And the web side of things, where there's a combination of approaches that integrate with this from a platform perspective. You can do proxy type things, you can do isolation things, and you can do browser type things, all of which create events that end up in the same place so that you could write alerts based on them and do investigations that are sort of channel independent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this makes sense from a Proofpoint perspective, because that tends to be your approach to things, isn't it? To build the console, and then you can plug in as many data sources as you want that are supported, right? So,
yeah, exactly.
In order to get going with this, what's the bare minimum of what you have to do in terms of feeding data to this?
Yeah, the fastest way to feed it a bunch of data is if you're already a Proofpoint customer, you probably got the email thing. That's easy to turn on. It's just a switch. And then, of course, the cloud side. I really do recommend people start with things like Microsoft 365, because there's a whole lot to see there. Not just on the threat side,
but the Graph API, well. So you just drop it a key and then off it goes?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's easier than rolling out an endpoint agent.
Easier than rolling out an endpoint agent, for sure. Although, just one note on the endpoint agent, it's a single agent that does both the insider risk use cases as well as the DLP use cases, and it is a user mode agent, not a kernel mode agent. So it is much, much, much lighter weight than the old heavy, brutal things that we used to roll out that would break browser updates and other horrible things like that, and cause
well, and easier to roll out as well, and just generally less headachy and less likely to cause major drama. Okay, so now that we've established that, we've got it set up. So this one, I'm guessing you're going to walk us through a demo panel where the example enterprise here, the demo enterprise has all of these sources of data coming into it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we actually built a single unified data model for all of the DLP alerts. So again, that's how we look at channel independent stuff in the same interface. But there's always kind of the dashboardy things that you have to show. I threw WinRAR in here just for you, Pat, just because I know how much you love WinRAR.
I actually wondered that, but that's quite funny, because it's it's basically an indicator of bad stuff usually when you see it in your enterprise. But
exactly, and these can be answers to any questions you want to ask, because I think one of the big things that we tried to do is make sure that you didn't have to be psychic in order to configure a DLP solution properly. We've
Yeah.
worked with so many organizations that have built up really years of intellectual property based on identifying exactly what they were looking for and then writing all kinds of elaborate policies in order to do that. You don't necessarily have to need to do all that in advance, though, if you have an architecture that basically allows you to ask questions based on, tell me what Carol did, or tell me who's using WinRAR today, or things along the lines of, who's touched that file and has anybody exfiltrated it? Those are all kinds of things that you can build that we would call explorations that you could pop into a dashboard like this one to keep track of on a relatively regular basis.
So you can basically come up with your own little squares here that, tell you a certain thing.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a couple of ways to kind of feed the squares. There are kind of the classic things that you would always be looking for around kind of DLP and the classic kind of, what we would call detectors, right? If you're looking for certain types of personal information, or even if you're looking for things like you should never see, like Mimikatz, those are all kind of classifiers that you can build for really obvious things. But different national identifiers exist in different
this
places.
is like insider risk and DLP kind of unified, right? Because if you're looking
Exactly.
for DLP, you're not going to be looking for Mimikatz, really, are you?
Yeah, exactly. But if somebody is so lazy that they run Mimikatz without renaming the executable, you do want to see that most of the time. But though that's just an example of course, something you could build. But really, you can kind of configure this to do anything from a classification perspective. There's the traditional ones, again, that we would call detectors. And then, the old school DLP approaches, dictionaries that are built up of words, and even dictionaries that are generated by little ML models that you train based on having, say, 5 to 10 documents. The other things you can do, exact data matching is a way to say, hey, I'm a healthcare provider. I have 11-digit patient record numbers, and I don't need to see every 11-digit number, but I need to see these 11-digit numbers. And of course, you have things like index document matching, which is very simple. Take a hash of this document. This is my top secret recipe, top secret nuclear codes, whatever it happens to be. It takes a hash of that, and you can do IDM or index document matching on that.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do, though, and this has been really, really critical, especially when we've deployed in Europe or to multinationals that operate in more privacy-sensitive jurisdictions. An analyst doesn't really need to see the sensitive stuff. They don't even really need to know the name of the person they're investigating if it's an insider investigation. And so even when you have data snippets that might actually reflect quite sensitive data like a health record, you can mask those. So that's something that you can turn on, again, that's pretty data specific, that ends up kind of feeding the squares and feeding the analytics that you can then generate.
So that was a European compliance thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's also kind of multinationals, they have very often interesting corporate structures, right? So we support all kinds of organizations that do a lot of work in, say,
and
Greater
the security
China,
unit might be over here, but dealing with this group over there, and there's some weird restrictions and legal reasons why that particular data can't be seen by that entity, and on and on.
Exactly. And there's I won't go through this because this gets definitely into some complicated territory, but there's basically what we would call attribute-based access control on the back end of this. So if you say anyone who's being investigated in the UK needs to be investigated by a security analyst who's also in the UK, you can use is in UK as an attribute to do that. So it's not just your role as an admin, your role as an analyst, your role as whatever, in order to build policies up around that.
So tell me something. How does one use this? Is this something where someone logs in once a day and gives it a quick scan? Is it something that you tune to spit out alerts via Slack or email messages, so that it's not something you have to log into? I mean, what is the actual way that people use it?
Yeah, great question. So the alert view is one that obviously you can start with, right? So you can basically say, I want to be alerted when this happens, and there's a lot of interesting ways to create that. And to a large extent, when you've had DLP in place for a long time, you probably built it up using some older technology, and you want to have the compliance boxes ticked. So obviously you can do all that. You can do channel specific things and workflow things. The vast majority of our customers who are larger will not ever touch this interface. They will use webhooks and look at it in ServiceNow, or they'll pop everything into
that's
Splunk and do it there.
that's what I was wondering. Yeah, I was wondering if you tune it to spit out alerts into your alert thing. Basically,
exactly.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you can definitely do the alert-based side of things. At the same time, you might want to look at it in a little different way, which is kind of surfaced here. If you have one user who's just absolutely in the bright red in terms of the risks that they're creating for the larger organization, you might want to then actually investigate that, not like a traditional alert where you're just trying to say, hey, that was data copied to a USB. In a vacuum, is this okay, or do I need to follow up some other way? Because honestly, when it comes to an alert like that, what you'd rather be doing is just kind of putting together something that's more proactive, like a policy. Like every time that happens, this happens. You either warn the end user, or you have them ask their manager for approval, or whatever the workflow is that lines up with your corporate culture. If, on the other hand, I want to know, why is Carol Brown generating substantially more alerts than anybody else in my organization, I just want to basically build an exploration, which to save a little time I already did, around Carol Brown, right? Just tell me everything she did across any platform where I have information. And so you can see the filter here is just the username Carol Brown. And so if we see anything she does across the cloud, across her endpoint, across email, across the web, we have all of those, neatly fit into a timeline view that a human analyst can make sense of.
Yeah. I mean, what sort of picture are you going to get, though? Like, how complete does your picture wind up being when you're looking into a user who's generating all of these alerts? I'm guessing you're just, you're going to need to have a bit of a feel for this, like what those alerts mean. It might not necessarily give you a complete picture. Although, I'm guessing other times you're going to click on some user's activity and go, oh my God, and know exactly what they're up to, right?
I mean, most of the time, it's honestly the latter, right? So,
okay, right.
So a fair amount of time, you're going to have, hey, this is somebody who's downloading something that's hit a classifier, and you might want to know a little bit about which rules fired and why they fired, and you might even get, the snippet that caused that to happen. In other cases,
you get 10 alerts that they've downloaded stuff they shouldn't have, and then a write to USB kind of thing.
Yes,
like that's,
exactly. And it's really putting together unusual access, very often unusual manipulation of a file, and then exfil that gives you some useful insight.
Yeah.
In this case, the other thing you're probably looking at, everyone wants to solve the, hey, people are leaving and taking things with them problem. If it's, an engineer taking source code, whatever it happens to be, if this user is, say, on a termination list and you get that from your HR management system, that's a very useful piece of context. But, the telemetry that you get and the investigation that you can actually launch based on this gets fairly comprehensive. So again, this did you a favor and used WinRAR in my example here. This is actually
this is a tailored demo. I love it.
It kind of is, yeah. If you are running in what we would call insider mode rather than just straight up endpoint DLP, endpoint DLP is basically just user data interactions, and it's taking a subset of everything that the user is doing. If, on the other hand, you have a reason to worry about a user, like they've resigned or they're working with ultra-sensitive information, you might want to know a lot more than that, and the tool's even capable of doing things like taking screenshots. So I can see that Carol's just fired up WinRAR here, and she's taken that file that she's downloaded, and she's actually using that application to manipulate that data. She's archiving it with a password, and that's a rule that I wanted to create an alert around. And she can see the file move that happens with that, and she deletes the original version of the file. I can really put together everything she's done there. Even the fact that she then fires up Outlook and then tries to email this to what very much looks like a burner Gmail address, right?
Yeah.
Again, this is sort of stuff that happens all day, every day. In this case, it's such an obvious exfil event that you'd have a rule to just block somebody emailing an encrypted zip to Gmail. Like, it's straightforward enough.
That was going to be my next question, which is like, we've so far just spoken about detection and looking at like, seeing when stuff is going sideways. But
yes,
I'm guessing you can put, especially once you've got an endpoint agent, you can probably put a lot of blocks in place to just stop some of this stuff. And you could even have workflows. I'm guessing when someone triggers a bunch of really like overtly bad stuff, you can like lock their account and call security kind of thing, right?
Yes, exactly. And when it comes to the actions you take, those are also channel specific, right? So in the case of this one, right, this is an email block that happened, and that was the right answer, right? She should not have been emailing an encrypted zip to Gmail. But I get some options here that are channel specific if I want to actually take different workflow actions. I can actually release this, which I wouldn't do. I can have it sent encrypted, or I can simply block it, which is actually what has already happened, and I don't need to do it. But those channel-specific things are all kind of built into the console, so that whether you're doing it through an investigation or an exploration, as we would call it, or an alert, all the channel-specific stuff is there to do. And then, obviously, you do want to learn over time. We actually even have sort of an ML model that learns how you dispose of different DLP alerts over time and suggests ways to handle them in a more automated way, so you don't have to have humans going through this data all day, every day.
All right.
And maybe getting to the funny stuff that you wouldn't think would be where you catch a lot of people, but this is a user who then is really persistent. She downloads that file again after having tried to email it to herself and having that blocked.
That's how a lot of users are going to behave. Oh, my email didn't work.
100%.
I will try it again.
I'll try again. And then
from
at this
now
point,
until eternity, basically, right?
Exactly. And so here you see a user, okay, she's now, the same user who's, of course, done all those other things. She's copying holidaypictures.jpg to a USB that she's just plugged in. But obviously that seems out of character based on everything she's done before. The nice thing about endpoint telemetry, I can see, oh wait, she renamed the file right before plugging that USB in. That file that was called holidaypictures.jpg. If I actually look at the file timeline, I can see
client social security numbers. Gee, subtle demo file name
very,
there,
very
Ryan.
subtle demo. I mean, I got the WinRAR part was nice and customized. I should have done something funnier for the sensitive data, but yes. So the fact that the file was renamed and the fact that she downloaded it 3 times and manipulated it in all kinds of ways, just looking at it from the perspective of the file as opposed to the user is the other thing we see people doing. Right, so you can start at either point as a jumping off point for analysis. That again, because it's across the entire platform, every user, every channel, it's almost like looking at all the weird executables in your broad environment, but it's sensitive data to do those sorts of things.
Now, I understand you've got an anecdote, another anecdote that you want to share. Like this is inspired by a real case.
Yep, this is maybe one of my favorite ones of all time. When we look at some of the ways that the tool gets used, some of the off-label ways turn out to be some of the most interesting. So in this case, this comes from a real example. This was a manufacturing company that was actually not even running our email protection and threat defense software. So we mocked up an interesting kind of demo here. So you can see, actually, we're going to use Taylor Swift tickets. I know, Pat, you're probably a giant Swiftie, as am I, of course. And you can see, you've got an email coming through. We're just going to say it's Gmail in this case, that, you've paid for it. He's paid $900, which is a steal for Taylor Swift tickets. And if you have any questions, please call this number. There's nothing to click on here. There's no attachment. It's just a phone number. You might call this callback phishing because that's what it is. Or, when you actually, see some of these, you see TeamViewer, all the other RMMs out there that, threat actors love because they're great ways to get around things like EDR. In the case that actually happened here, we had a user who called a number and actually was socially engineered into downloading an RMM tool and giving that threat actor remote access to their endpoint. That person actually happened to be the person who coordinated global travel for this organization. So she had everybody's passport pictures. She had an incredible amount of sensitive information. And skipping to the point here, she had, of course, been sending all of that information unwittingly to a ransomware actor. So you can see on this platform, this is not what you get from an EDR, but you can see client info.
Well, but it's, I mean, it makes sense. Like, you're going to catch, like, if you've got an insider threat platform, it is actually a way to catch social engineering, because people who have been manipulated into doing bad stuff are essentially unwitting insider threats. Exactly. So it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And so in this case, and this is actually what happened in actual fact. The threat actor actually did access some information. They were able to exfil some. Other things got blocked because the tool actually blocked it. It was very obvious personal information that actually happened. So just kind of cutting to the chase here, the typical thing happened. They rolled IR. They had their ransomware negotiator join the party, but they were able to actually figure out that the threat actor was lying about what they had access to. Even though they have, of course, made an extortion attempt
because they're on their leak site saying, look at this passport scan, we've got everything. And then, doing an investigation through this, you can say, no, you've got some stuff from Bob's computer because you got him to install, a remote access tool on his system. I get it. I'm with you. It's handy. And that's cool. That's a good story. You're right.
Well, and the nice thing about that was that not only did they not pay the ransom, of course, but the third-party IR firm who does nothing but ransomware all day long said it was the fastest investigation they'd ever done because they had all this data. They could reconstruct exactly what happened, and they were in a much, much better position to actually negotiate or choose not to negotiate, which they did in this case. They didn't pay the ransom, got credit monitoring for a few employees whose passports had been taken, and didn't have to disclose it publicly. So everybody won except for the threat actor.
High fives all around. Yep. All right, Ryan Kalember, I think that gives people the idea. What's the name of this platform, and where can people find more information on it?
Yeah, platform is called Proofpoint Sigma. The website, proofpoint.com, is a good way to do that. And of course, there's deeper dives into the insider angle of this, as well as, of course, the DLP angle that you'll find there.
All right, people can go check that out. Thanks a lot for joining me for this demo, Ryan Kalember.
Enjoyed it, Pat.